Tonight we begin with something a little drier. The parched, windswept world of Dust Bowl America, a land of broken dreams, failed crops, and soul-crushing hardship. This wasn't the America of Hollywood glamour or Roosevelt's fireside chats. This was the America of dust, drought, and daily struggle, a place where surviving until sundown was its own small victory. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and the first thing you see is your sister's arm, inches from your face, dusty and twitching slightly from some haunting dream. Welcome to your one and only shack. It's not a bedroom, it's not a living room, it's the room, and it's everything. You share it with 5 other souls, 1 mattress, 2 chairs that creak under the lightest weight, and a mouse who's been around so long you're considering naming him. There's no wallpaper, just warped boards where pictures used to hang. The roof leaks when it rains, which isn't often enough, and the wooden slats let in fine streams of dust that settle on everything, even when the wind is still. The stove smokes, the air is dry. The floorboards shift like they're trying to escape this place as much as you are. You're wrapped in a thin cotton quilt that's been patched more times than anyone can count, and the pillow under your head is made of old flour sacks stuffed with whatever soft material could be scrounged, cattail fluff, old rags, maybe someone's worn-out Sunday shirt. There's no plumbing. That bucket in the corner? That's the toilet, wash basin and emergency water source. Depending on the time of day and level of desperation, you've learned to move quickly in the mornings. It helps with the smell. There's one window, if you can call it that. So covered in dust and cracked in one corner, it mostly just lets in the sound of wind whipping across barren fields, neighbors' chickens scratching for non-existent bugs, and someone coughing 2 shacks down. You try not to think about the fact that the window faces what used to be fertile soil, but is now a sea of dust and dead crops. Every morning begins with a family-wide shuffle. You dress quickly to avoid the chill. You swap spots around the wash basin like it's a game of musical chairs with fewer prizes. And someone always spills the precious water you collected yesterday. And yet somehow, this shack is still home. You know which floorboard creaks, which corner lets in the most dust, and which wallboard rattles just before your father curses about another day without rain. You know the smell, the dirt, the strange sense of belonging. But make no mistake, this shack isn't comfortable. It isn't cute. It's a place that prepares you for the day outside by making you suffer a little before you even leave. And trust me, the planes won't be kinder. You stumble out the front door, still blinking sleep from your eyes and clutching half a biscuit, and immediately walk face first into a wall of choking dust. But this isn't the gentle prairie dust that used to settle on your grandmother's porch. No. This is the infamous black blizzard, and it's like trying to breathe through a hot, dry rag. The sky is brown, the ground is brown, the air is brown. You can't see the fence line, and you're pretty sure that's your neighbor's chicken coop ahead, or possibly their tractor. Could go either way. This dust isn't just weather, it's murderous. Formed by the unhappy marriage of drought-stricken topsoil and relentless wind, it clings to everything. It seeps into your lungs, coats your throat, and gives your clothes that signature prairie look. Dust-streaked, and somehow both stiff and limp at the same time. You cough. Everyone coughs. It's part of the local soundtrack, like the creaking windmill and the distant sound of someone praying for rain. Children hack like lifelong smokers. Old men cough so hard they rattle the walls of their shacks. And doctors? Well, they recommend moving east, which is great advice if you haven't already lost everything to the bank. The smell is a complex bouquet: dry earth, dead crops, livestock struggling to survive, and last night's beans. If perfume makers bottled this, it would be called Eau de Rural Despair. And it gets into everything. Your hair, your food, your one nice shirt you wear to church and funerals. It's all stained with the scent of nature's betrayal. The worst part, no one's surprised. People go about their day blindly, literally. Lanterns burn at noon and still don't help. You hear someone stumble in the yard next to you, and someone else curse as their hat disappears into the dust storm like a surrendering flag. At night, it gets even worse. The dust seeps through door cracks, it blankets the shacks, and if you don't keep a lamp lit, you might walk straight into the stove. Or worse, your neighbor's privy. So yes, the air in Dust Bowl America doesn't just choke you. It brands you, ages you, and dares you to keep breathing. And you haven't even reached the fields yet. You've made it out of bed, out of your dust-caked shack, and into the day's brown beginnings. Now your stomach groans. Time for breakfast. Except breakfast in Dust Bowl America is less of a meal and more of a ritual in lowered expectations. If you're part of the farming class, and you almost certainly are, breakfast isn't eggs or bacon or fluffy pancakes. It's a biscuit that could double as a doorstop. Maybe some cornmeal mush if the weevils haven't gotten to the last of your stores. And coffee. Always coffee. Not because it's comforting, but because you need something hot and bitter to wash the dust from your throat. Milk? Only if your cow hasn't died yet. And even then it's a gamble. It might be thin and blue, the sign of a starving animal giving her last. Sugar is expensive. Butter, a memory. Jam. Only if your mother managed to preserve some fruit before the drought killed the orchard. If you're lucky enough to work at the grain elevator or live near the general store. You might smell fresh bread on the air. Don't get excited. That's not your bread. That's someone else's breakfast. Likely belonging to a man with a bank account and a car that still runs. And if you're really down on your luck, a tenant farmer, an out-of-work field hand, or just someone whose crops have failed 3 years running, you might find yourself lining up at a relief station for a ladle of watery soup. It's warm, it's edible. That's about the kindest thing one can say. Street vendors don't exist out here. This isn't the city. It's just miles of dust, desperation, and the occasional jackrabbit too stubborn or too stupid to leave. You learn to be grateful for what you have, which isn't much. You eat quickly, standing, wrapped in your coat against the morning chill. There's no dining room, no radio playing cheerful tunes, just dusty wind, creaking farm equipment, and the distant sound of someone already yelling about another dead crop. And now, bellies only half full and spirits not at all, it's time to step into the real monster. The fields of the Great Plains. Welcome to the fields of Dust Bowl America. A sprawling, barren expanse that used to be the nation's breadbasket, but now resembles the surface of the moon. Every step you take is a reminder of what's been lost. And the land doesn't care if you've been farming it for generations or if your children are going hungry because of its betrayal. First things first, there are no crops, or if there are, they're so stunted, withered, and covered in dust that using the word crop feels like an insult to agriculture itself. The main field is a dusty battlefield of half-buried fences, abandoned plows, and dirt so fine it could be mistaken for powder. Tumbleweeds roll past at terrifying speeds. Grasshoppers swarm anything green. One false move and you're face down in a dust drift that feels like it's trying to suffocate you, because it probably is. Now mind the cracks. They run through the parched earth like wounds, carrying all the land's broken promises. Failed wheat, dead cattle, topsoil that blows away with each gust, and the occasional farming implement too heavy to retrieve. Crossing them without twisting an ankle requires the balance of a tightrope walker, or a very sturdy pair of boots and no dignity left to lose. But it's not just the terrain that's out to get you, it's the wildlife too. You've got jackrabbits darting around like confused missiles, grasshoppers stripping anything remotely edible, and coyotes growing bolder as their food sources disappear. Everyone's desperate for anything that might keep them alive another day. There are also the bankers, trying to look sympathetic while preparing to foreclose on yet another family farm. If someone can't make their payments, they'll eventually wander over, paper in hand, assuming they haven't already been paid to look the other way by a larger operation eyeing your land. The air still thick with dust, now flavored with desperation and the acrid scent of dead dreams. And in the distance, you hear church bells. Or maybe that's just your ears ringing after the dust has clogged them for so long. Oh, and if it rains, which it doesn't, hardly ever, the parched earth can't even absorb it properly. Flash floods turn gullies into death traps. No one offers an umbrella. No one even looks surprised. You just stand there, face upturned, letting the mud streak down your cheeks like tears of relief. And this is just your morning chores. Survive the fields, and you might live to find some way to feed your family, or at least something that keeps the bank at bay for another month. You've navigated the dust drifts masquerading as fields, dodged rabbits and rattlesnakes, and now it's time to make your living, if the land allows it. In Dust Bowl America, a job isn't a title. It's a test of endurance, a way to slowly fall apart while clinging to the illusion of stability. If you're a man, you might still be trying to farm, 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, for crops that wither before your eyes. The heat is relentless. The wind is constant and filled with grit that gets into everything from your boots to your lungs. If you lose a finger to farm equipment, don't worry. There are plenty of desperate neighbors ready to work your land for almost nothing. Don't fancy farming anymore? Try day labor at the grain elevator, or working as a mechanic or joining the WPA building roads, where your back gives out by 40 and your lungs fill with dust by 50 if you live that long. Women. You're cooking with whatever you can scrounge, washing clothes in water so carefully rationed it barely gets the dirt out, sewing patches on clothes until the original fabric is just a memory, all while keeping dust out of the food, the bedding, the baby's eyes. For what? So your family can do it all again tomorrow. No sick days, no insurance, and no sympathy. Maybe you're picking cotton until your fingers bleed or working as a fruit tramp, following the harvest from California to Washington, living in tent camps, earning pennies for hours of back-breaking labor. The sunburn is free. The dysentery? Also included. Or perhaps you've packed everything you own onto your car and headed west. That magical journey where the destitute are helped by being worked to the bone in exchange for wages that barely cover gas to the next town. You're not here to thrive. You're here to not starve too visibly. Jobs come and go. Illness doesn't. Injury means starvation. There's no workers' comp, no social security, and no unemployment office in sight. Just a foreman yelling at you to pick faster, complain less, and stop getting blood on the cotton. And heaven forbid you organize. There's always someone more desperate behind you willing to work for even less. Competition is fierce and compassion is scarce. So yes, you're employed. But don't get too excited. In Dust Bowl America, a job doesn't pull you out of poverty. It just gives you something to do while you're in it. In Dust Bowl America, childhood isn't a time of innocence. It's a short window before your hands callous and your eyes grow old from staring at too much dust and too little hope. If you're tall enough to reach a plow handle, congratulations. You're considered employable. Forget toys and school books. By the time you're 6, you're already working. 8, if your parents believe education might somehow save you. School is irregular. Work is your future and your present. You might be a field hand pulling weeds from crops that won't survive anyway, watching for grasshoppers that can strip a field in hours. If you complain, you're reminded of how lucky you are to have land at all. If you cry, you're told to save the moisture. It's too precious to waste on tears. Or perhaps you're a chore boy, waking before dawn to milk cows with dry udders, feed chickens that produce fewer eggs each week, and haul water from a well that's dropping dangerously low. The pay, a roof and meals, the hazard, watching everything you love slowly die around you. A charming childhood. Some children are dust fighters, constantly sealing cracks in walls, wiping surfaces, hanging wet sheets over windows during storms to catch the dirt. You work until your hands are raw, your lungs wheeze, and your eyes sting from particles finer than flour. Others help mothers can whatever food can be grown or gathered, stretch meals until they're more memory than sustenance, or care for younger siblings while parents search for work. You grow up fast, learn to need little, and hope today isn't the day the bank takes the farm or your father gives up completely. School, when you can attend, is a one-room affair with books older than the teacher. You walk miles through dust or snow, often returning home to more chores. Education is a luxury that drought doesn't respect. Learning to read is secondary to learning to survive, and if you're a migrant child, the world doesn't owe you anything. Different schools every few months, if at all. Work in the fields alongside adults. Some die of malnutrition or disease. Absorbed into the dust, a footnote in someone else's history book. In the eyes of Dust Bowl America, children are extra hands, future farmers, and heirs to debt. Childhood isn't stolen. It's simply never offered. And yet somehow they survive. They play with handmade toys, tell stories by lamplight, and laugh, between chores, between coughs, because they have to. Because in the Great Plains, even children are expected to carry the weight of failed harvests on their tiny, dust-covered shoulders. If you thought surviving the Dust Bowl was hard as a man, try doing it as a woman. You work all the time, and no, you don't get medals or recognition. You get cracked hands, permanent exhaustion, and a society that expects you to smile while your spine slowly bends from the weight of holding everything together. If you're unmarried, you might be a school teacher. That means teaching children who are half-starved and distracted in a building that can't keep the dust out, with books that are falling apart, and for wages that might be paid in produce instead of dollars. You eat what parents can spare, you live in a boarding house or with different families each week, and if you show any sign of having a personal life, you could lose your position. Married, that's not better, it's double duty. You manage your own home, likely a drafty shack, raise children, usually several, cook with dwindling supplies, sew clothes from flour sacks, and stretch the family budget with impossible mathematics. And then maybe you take in laundry from the banker's family or the local store owner, scrubbing, wringing, hanging, just to earn enough for coffee and sugar. Some women become farm partners, working the fields alongside their husbands while still managing the household. It pays nothing extra. It ages you faster than time itself. And if you collapse from exhaustion, the work still waits for you at dawn. And then there's the canning and preserving, trying to make food last through winters that seem to grow longer each year. You start with whatever the garden produced, if anything, and end with shelves that look increasingly bare. Management says it's your fault if the family goes hungry. When none of that is enough, or when you're widowed, abandoned, or just unlucky, migration becomes the only option. You pack what's left of your life into a car that barely runs and head west with children who don't understand why they had to leave their toys behind. Protection? Only if you count determination and prayer. Women in Dust Bowl America are expected to be strong, resourceful, uncomplaining, and always busy. You're the backbone of the family, even if the family has no land, no prospects, and no future. There are no rights, no maternity care, no safety net. Just other women, sometimes kind, sometimes broken, trying to survive the same nightmare. But somehow they do, with grim determination, whispered songs, and hands that never stop working. And still, they find time to brush the dust from their children's hair and put wildflowers in a jar on the table. Because someone has to. You might have dodged the dust storms, survived the heat, and even kept your farm running. But in Dust Bowl America, you can't dodge disease. It's everywhere. Lurking in the dust, the water, the air, and quite possibly in the rabbits you caught for dinner. Illness doesn't knock. It drifts in with the dust clouds, seeps through your makeshift masks, and settles in your lungs while you sleep. Let's start with the basics. Dust pneumonia, or brown plague as some called it, because it slowly fills your lungs with dirt until breathing becomes a luxury. The cough is dry, constant, and eventually brings up mud instead of phlegm. Everyone knows someone who has it. Most people just keep working until they drop. Then there's typhoid, which arrives through your drinking water like an unseen predator. One minute you feel fine, the next you're burning with fever, delirious, and desperately trying to keep down what little food you have. It spreads through families like wildfire. Whole farms go silent. The local well is abandoned, too late. By then, the damage is done. Rickets, pellagra, scarlet fever, old visitors made stronger by malnutrition and stress. Each has its own signature, but they all share one thing in common. They hit children and the elderly first and hardest. If you can't afford a doctor, and you can't, you're left with home remedies, poultices made from whatever plants still grow, or the magical healing properties of wishful thinking. Of course, there's always patent medicine, mysterious bottles of alcohol, herbs, and who knows what sold from traveling wagons. You've got a cough? Try Dr. Parker's Miracle Elixir. Fever, Hartmann's Wonder Tonic. Watching your third child waste away? Double dose. You'll still suffer, but you'll suffer with slightly less awareness. And what about the doctors? Well, they mean well, most of them. But medicine is still guessing with Latin. Many rural areas share one physician who's overworked and undersupplied. Surgery is done on kitchen tables. Antibiotics aren't widely available. Your odds with a midwife or folk healer aren't much worse. Disease doesn't discriminate. But your living conditions help it choose you faster. No clean water, no fresh food, dust in every breath. It's a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, viruses, and despair. In Dust Bowl America, if something doesn't kill you fast, it will kill you slowly. And if you're somehow still standing, time to check on the livestock. What's left of them? You're sweating through your patched shirt, your lips are cracked, and your throat feels like it's been scraped by sandpaper. Time for a drink? Sure. But in Dust Bowl America, water isn't just a beverage. It's the difference between life and death. Let's start with the wells, the lifeblood of the farm. They're also dropping lower every month, turning brackish or drying up completely. What used to be an easy bucket drop now requires rope so long you can barely pull it back up. Imagine standing over your well, watching the bucket come up with less water each time, knowing that without it, your family, your livestock, and your last desperate crops will all die. Now, drink sparingly. Tomorrow might bring dust instead of water. If you live in a slightly larger town, your water might come from a municipal pump which you share with the entire community. The Great Plains were never water-rich to begin with, but now it's becoming scarce enough to cause fights. And the worst part? You might be rationed to a single bucket per day, per family. Typhoid loves compromised water. So does dysentery. They spread through desperate communities like gossip. Whole families taken down in days. A shared dipper, an unwashed hand, a desperate drink from a stagnant pond, and you're digging graves instead of furrows. Bathing. Now that's laughable. Most people use the same water for multiple purposes. If you're lucky, you get a quick wipe down with a damp cloth. If you're a child, you might share bath water with 3 siblings once a week, and that same water might water the garden afterward. Hygiene is strategic. Some communities build reservoirs eventually. Desperate attempts to capture whatever rain might fall. It took complete crop failure to make change. Until then, you boil your water when you can, or drink coffee, the safe beverage that keeps you going through endless days of dust and disappointment. Weak, bitter, and slightly gritty with salvation. So yes, in Dust Bowl America, you can die from lack of water. The trick isn't just avoiding thirst. It's stretching every precious drop to its absolute limit. You've tried honest farming. It's long, dusty, and now entirely futile. The water is disappearing. The bank is impatient. And the relief checks, if they come, barely cover flour and lard. So what's left? Desperation. And in Dust Bowl America, it's not just a feeling. It's a way of life. Start small. Maybe you're a rabbit hunter, spending nights catching jackrabbits that have somehow survived when everything else has died. You sell them for pennies at the local trading post, knowing they're probably riddled with disease. It's not about profit. It's about having something to trade when your own food runs out. If you're a woman, you might become a seamstress, turning feed sacks into dresses, patching clothes until they're more patch than original fabric, making do with rusty needles and thread unraveled from older garments. Or maybe you sell eggs from chickens that lay smaller and fewer with each passing month. Feeling bold? Become a foreclosure vulture, attending bank auctions of your neighbors' farms, buying their equipment for pennies on the dollar, feeling guilty but knowing someone will do it anyway. Or try your hand at moonshining, gambling, or running a dance hall where lonely men pay for female company and a brief escape from reality. And if you've really got nothing left to lose, there's always theft. Break into the general store, the grain silo, or, if you're desperate, the church donation box. You might find something to feed your family. You might also find a shotgun and someone who's just as desperate to protect what little they have left. The law exists, but sheriffs are overwhelmed, underpaid, and often facing the same hardships as everyone else. Plus, how do you arrest a man for stealing food when his children are visibly starving? And let's face it, you might do the same in his position. Crime in the Dust Bowl wasn't organized. It was situational, born of necessity rather than greed. Then there's the exodus west, packing everything into rattling jalopies, becoming part of a human stream heading toward California's promised land. It's terrifying. It's illegal crossing state lines when you have no money. It pays nothing up front. But if the alternative is watching your children waste away, well, even false hope has appeal. Of course, the consequences are real. Get caught stealing and you could be jailed, beaten, or ostracized from a community you desperately need. Head west, and you might find more misery than opportunity. But if the alternative is starving on a dust-covered farm, well, risk becomes rational. Because in Dust Bowl America, morality takes a backseat to survival. Desperation isn't a temporary state. It is life. And for many, it's the only option left on the table. Let's say you've caught something. A cough that won't quit. A fever that burns too hot. Maybe your arm's been mangled in farm equipment. Time to see a doctor. Good luck. Because in Dust Bowl America, medicine is less scientific practice and more creative improvisation with limited resources. Doctors exist, sure. Some even have proper training. But unless you live in a decent-sized town, your first medical professional might be 50 miles away across dust-choked roads. And payment? He might accept chickens, handiwork, or promises. Cash is something people remember, not something they have. Can't reach a doctor. Maybe there's a midwife or folk healer nearby. Home remedies are passed down like family Bibles. Mustard plasters for chest congestion, onion poultices for infections, whiskey for toothaches, or for courage before amateur dentistry with pliers. It won't cure you, but you might stop caring so much about the pain. And don't even think about hospitals. They're for cities and people with money. The best you can hope for is the doctor's front parlor, converted to an examination room with instruments that have seen better days. The tools might be sterilized, if the doctor's up on current medical thinking. Anesthesia might be available, or it might be someone holding you down while you bite on a leather strap. If you survive the initial crisis, infection or complications might finish the job. A splinter can turn gangrenous, an infected tooth can kill, and childbirth. Women face it with grim determination and the knowledge that each pregnancy might be their last. The nearest surgical care could be a day's drive away, if the car even starts. Medical knowledge is improving nationally, but spreading slowly to rural areas. You might be prescribed bed rest, castor oil, or strange concoctions to purify the blood. Country doctors do their best with what they have, which often isn't much more than basic tools, whatever medicines they can keep stocked, and years of experience with similar cases. There are a few modern medications reaching rural areas, sulfur drugs, basic antibiotics, but they're expensive and often reserved for the most dire cases. After all, most people can't afford what might save them. So, what do most people do when sick? They endure. They drink teas brewed from prairie herbs. They say prayers and keep working as long as they can stand, because every day in bed is income lost, and recovery often feels more like stubborn refusal to die than medical success. You don't go to the doctor to get better. You go because death is sitting visibly at the foot of the bed. And sometimes, just sometimes, you manage to show him the door. The sun sets, the oil lamps flicker to life, and the wind seems to grow teeth. You might think the hardship eases at night, but this is Dust Bowl America. When darkness falls, the real fears come out. Forget peaceful evenings and restful sleep. The night belongs to worry, and it's never empty. The lamp barely cuts through the gloom. Everything is a shadow, creaking boards that might be the wind or might be the house finally giving up. Strange sounds from the barn where animals are dying. Footsteps that could be someone desperate enough to steal your last supplies. If you're awake alone, you're either on watch or you've run out of sleep after too many nightmares. Families huddled together in single rooms, conserving lamp oil and body heat. Children cough in the darkness, a sound that makes parents exchange worried glances. Is it just dust, or is it something worse? Medicine cabinets hold little more than hope and empty bottles. Thieves exist, born of desperation rather than malice. And if your route takes you past a foreclosed farm at night, you hold your breath and walk faster. Not because of ghosts, though the abandoned homes do seem to accuse, but because someone might still be there, someone who has nothing left to lose. If you're a woman alone, the danger multiplies. Men made mean by circumstance and lack. Offers that sound like threats. The darkness hides intentions, some born of loneliness, others something darker. Even if you stay indoors, you're not always safe. Houses groan in the wind. Dust finds new entry points. Arguments simmer in whispers about money, about leaving, about whether things will ever get better. Sometimes someone takes a loan that can't be repaid, and everyone knows what that means. And let's not forget the storms. If a dust storm hits at night, it's terror in darkness. No warning, no visibility. Just black dust pouring through every crack while you press damp cloths to children's faces and pray the air doesn't solidify completely. If you must venture out, you carry a lantern and hope the wind doesn't extinguish it or turn it into a beacon for trouble. Because in Dust Bowl America, night isn't rest, it's reckoning. The poor don't sleep soundly. They sleep ready. One ear tuned to the wind, one hand near whatever might serve as protection, and for many, dawn is just something to survive to. Because kindness, oddly enough, survives here too. Though the land shows no mercy, and the skies offer no relief, the people, those dust-covered, weather-beaten souls, still manage small acts of humanity that defy their circumstances. It happens quietly. A neighbor sharing the last of their well water with a family whose own has run dry. Women gathering to help deliver a baby by lamplight, bringing what little clean cloth they have. Men repairing a widow's roof before the next storm hits, asking nothing in return but perhaps a cup of that weak, gritty coffee. Churches become more than places of worship. They're community centers where people bring what they can, a potato, a handful of beans, a jar of preserved peaches, and somehow leave with enough to feed their children for another day. The pastor might be paid in eggs or not at all, but Sunday service continues. Hope is the only currency that hasn't depreciated. When the dust storms come, families take in neighbors. 8 people might crowd into a space meant for 4, sharing body heat and stories to distract from the howling outside. Children from different families play together with toys made from scraps, corn husk dolls, whittled wooden animals, marbles fashioned from clay. In their games, the crops always grow tall, and the rain always comes. Even the ritual of a shared meal becomes sacred. No matter how meager, food is blessed, savored, and divided with careful precision. The host always insists guests take more, even when there clearly isn't enough. And somehow, everyone leaves the table feeling they've been given something precious. Books are rare treasures passed from home to home. A novel might make the rounds of an entire county, its pages growing brittle and stained, its story offering brief transport to somewhere, anywhere else. The local schoolteacher reads aloud on Friday afternoons, and for an hour dust doesn't exist. Sometimes kindness is practical. Knowledge shared about how to extend flour with cornmeal, a recipe for a poultice that draws infection, warnings about which banker might foreclose faster, or which traveling doctor is actually a fraud. And yes, there are still births, weddings, celebrations, though subdued by necessity. A new baby is a miracle, even if it's born into hardship. A wedding might only feature a dress made from flour sacks and a cake without sugar, but people still dance. Life perseveres. When death comes, as it does too often, the community gathers. They dig the grave because the family can't afford the undertaker. They bring food. They speak of better days that might never come. They sing hymns under a dust-choked sky. And for a moment, no one is alone. These aren't grand gestures. They won't make headlines or history books. But in a time when the earth itself seems determined to scour humanity from its surface, the simple act of helping your neighbor becomes radical defiance. Because in Dust Bowl America, kindness isn't just nice, it's survival. Every villain needs a face. But in Dust Bowl America, the most feared predator wears a suit, carries a ledger, and speaks in the calm, measured tones of someone who's never missed a meal. The banks. These aren't the grand financial institutions of New York. These are local affairs, small brick buildings with heavy wooden doors that seem designed to close with finality. Inside, men in starched collars calculate the precise value of broken dreams and failed harvests. For many farmers, the relationship with the bank began years earlier, during the boom times of World War I, when wheat prices soared and easy credit flowed. They borrowed to buy more land, better equipment, to expand operations. The future seemed limitless. Then came the crash, the drought, the dust. And suddenly, those friendly loans became nooses. The banker arrives on your property unannounced, but you've been expecting him. He's wearing polished shoes that look obscene against the dusty yard. He has papers. Always papers. His voice is neutral as he explains that you've missed too many payments. The drought isn't his concern. Your children's hunger isn't his department. He needs the money or he needs the land. Most times he takes both. The foreclosure process is clinical but feels violent. Your home, your fields, your family's history, reduced to figures in a column. The banker doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't hate it. He simply does it because that's his job. His own family eats regular meals. His own children attend school without coughs. The dust affects him too, but he has the means to escape it when necessary. Sometimes there's a public auction. Your neighbors come not to support but to bid on your tractor, your tools, your wife's sewing machine. They avoid your eyes. They need these things to survive themselves. You try not to hate them. Other times the sheriff comes with the banker. Force is rarely needed. What are you going to do? Fight. Against what? Against whom? The bank is everywhere and nowhere. It's a system, not a person. You can't punch a mortgage. The cruelest part? Many bankers are your neighbors. They attend your church. Their children play with yours. But business is business. The banking system doesn't accommodate drought or dust or desperation. So you load what's left of your belongings onto whatever vehicle still runs. You tell your children this is an adventure, and you join the stream of the dispossessed heading west, or to cities, or to tent communities on the outskirts of towns that don't want you there. Some resist. They hold foreclosure sales where no one bids except the farmer himself, offering pennies for his own equipment, while neighbors stand with shotguns, ensuring no outsiders participate. These are temporary victories. The banks always find a way, and through it all, the dust continues to fall. On the foreclosed land, on the empty homes, on the ledger books that reduce human suffering to neat columns of red ink. Because in Dust Bowl America, the banks don't just take your farm, they take your future. When your world has collapsed into a brown haze of dust and poverty, the words New Deal sound almost mythical, like a promise of rain to parched earth. But in Dust Bowl America, government help is as complex as the crisis it attempts to address. President Roosevelt's voice crackles through radios in the few homes that still have electricity or batteries. His fireside chats speak of hope, of action, of a government that cares. For people who felt abandoned by both nature and nation, these words are water in the desert. But what does the New Deal actually mean on the ground, in the dust, where people are dying? First comes the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. Young men, mostly sons of farmers who can no longer support them, are shipped off to plant trees, build dams, create parks. They send home $25 of their $30 monthly wage. It's not farming, it's not freedom, but it's food and purpose and escape from watching crops die day after day. Then there's the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. Roads are built across prairies where nothing grows. Schools rise from dusty ground. Murals depicting American life, though rarely its suffering, decorate public buildings. The pay is minimal, the work exhausting, but it's something. For farmers who still have land, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration offers a bizarre solution. Kill your livestock, plow under your crops, and we'll pay you not to produce food, even as people starve. The logic, reducing supply to raise prices, makes sense in economic textbooks, but feels like madness when you're slaughtering healthy animals during a hunger crisis. Relief checks come sporadically. They're never enough. They're wrapped in paperwork and pride-swallowing interviews where government workers assess whether you're deserving poor. The worthy receive help. The unworthy, often determined by race, reputation, or political leanings, are left to fend for themselves. Some communities benefit more than others. Towns with the right political connections get CCC camps, WPA projects, new schools. Others watch as government men in clean vehicles drive past without stopping. And through it all, the Resettlement Administration tries to move people off land that can no longer support them, sometimes to planned communities, sometimes simply elsewhere. It feels like an admission of defeat. This land, once touted as the nation's breadbasket, is being abandoned. The most visible New Deal project in many areas is the Farm Security Administration photographers. Men and women with cameras capturing the suffering of the plains for urban audiences who can't quite believe America contains such poverty. They document hollow-eyed children and dust-buried farms. Sometimes they pay a quarter for the privilege of photographing someone's desperation. The photos go east. Help does not necessarily follow. For Black and Mexican American farmers, the New Deal often fails entirely. Relief programs are administered locally by the same power structures that have always excluded them. They're the last hired for WPA projects, the last to receive loans, the first to be pushed off their land. So, is the New Deal hope or empty promise? In Dust Bowl America, it's both. A lifeline that's too short, a helping hand that doesn't reach everyone. For some, it's the difference between starvation and survival. For others, it's just another broken promise from a distant government. But even those who criticize it most harshly cash the relief checks when they come. Because ideology offers poor nutrition to hungry children, and in the Dust Bowl, you take what you can get. You've hung on longer than most. Your neighbors' farms stand empty, doors banging in the wind, fields returning to dust. But today you've made the decision that thousands before you have made. It's time to go west. The preparation is simple because there's so little left to prepare. You load the family jalopy, if it still runs, with whatever hasn't been sold, pawned, or lost to the dust. Mattresses tied to the roof, children squeezed between suitcases in the back seat, perhaps a chicken coop lashed to the fender. Everything you couldn't bear to leave behind but isn't worth enough to sell. The car groans under the weight of your remaining possessions and impossible hopes. And then you join the exodus. Route 66, the Mother Road, becomes a slow-moving river of the desperate. Jalopies, trucks patched with wood and wire, even horse-drawn wagons in some cases. License plates from Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, the dust states, identifying you as part of this unwanted migration. The journey itself is brutal. Tires blow out on desert roads, radiators overheat in mountain passes, gas money runs out in towns that have already seen too many like you. You sleep by the roadside, cook beans over campfires, and try to keep the children clean with water rationed by the cup. Towns along the route quickly develop attitudes about Okies, regardless of where you're actually from. Some are sympathetic, offering a meal or a church basement to sleep in. Others post deputies at the city limits, turning away anyone who looks too poor, too desperate, too dusty. There's no work here, move along. But California beckons. Orange groves, vegetable fields, the promise of year-round growing seasons and wages that might actually feed a family. The reality, as you'll discover, rarely matches the dream. When you finally reach the Golden State's border, you face the bum blockade, police checking cars, turning back those without money or guaranteed jobs. Some families are separated at this unofficial border crossing. Some turn around, defeated, with nowhere to go but the dust they fled. If you make it through, you'll find Central Valley labor camps, tent cities where hundreds, sometimes thousands, live in conditions that make your abandoned farmhouse look palatial. Canvas walls, communal latrines, water from a single spigot. And all around, the silent hostility of communities that see you as invaders, disease carriers, job stealers. Work, when you find it, pays pennies for hours of stooping in fields under a sun that burns differently than the one back home. You pick cotton until your fingers bleed, just like in Oklahoma. Except here, you're not working your own land. You're working for someone who sees you as machinery, with an unfortunate human component. Your children are bullied in local schools, if they're allowed to attend at all. No Okies signs appear in shop windows and restaurant doors. The California dream reveals itself as just another version of the nightmare you left behind, but with unfamiliar landscapes and the added sting of being unwanted. Some give up. They drift back eastward, pride in tatters, to live with relatives or to try sharecropping on land they once owned. Others stick it out, forming communities of the displaced, sharing what little they have, and gradually putting down new roots in soil they'll never own. And through it all, letters are sent back home, usually more optimistic than truthful, because admitting you were wrong about the West feels like admitting defeat. This exodus isn't the pioneer journey of American mythology. There's no land to claim, no opportunity waiting. Just the desperate movement of people who have run out of options. Because in Dust Bowl America, sometimes the only choice left is which direction to flee. In the modern age, it's easy to forget that nature isn't just something pretty to look at through a window. It's a force, sometimes benevolent, sometimes cruel, and in the case of Dust Bowl America, completely unforgiving. The Great Plains weren't meant to be plowed. Not really. This was grassland, tall swaying prairie grass with root systems that reached deep into the soil, holding it in place against winds that could strip paint from a barn. But progress demanded wheat. America and war-torn Europe needed bread, and the plains looked flat, empty, and perfect for mechanized farming. So the sod was broken, the native grasses were ripped out, and for a while, when the rains came regularly, it seemed like mankind had successfully tamed another wilderness. Nature waited, and then it struck back. First came drought, not a single dry season, but years of it. The land cracked, wells failed, and the soil, no longer anchored by those deep prairie roots, began to move. Then came the wind, not the gentle breeze of pastoral poetry, but the relentless, screaming gales of the high plains. It picked up the topsoil, the only part of the land that could grow anything, and turned it into a weapon. Dust storms rose hundreds, sometimes thousands of feet high, moving at freeway speeds, choking everything in their path. The Black Sunday storm of April 14, 1935, turned day to night. People caught outside suffocated. Animals dropped dead in the fields. Even hardened farmers who thought they'd seen it all wept in the darkness of what felt like the end of the world. This wasn't just weather. This was judgment. For those who stayed, and many had no choice, the relationship with the land became adversarial. You fought for every crop. You scraped dirt from windowsills. You watched the soil you needed to survive blow away to someone else's fields or into the Atlantic Ocean. Some adapted. They tried new farming techniques, contour plowing, crop rotation, leaving strips of native growth to slow the wind. The government eventually sent out experts from the Soil Conservation Service. They taught terracing, shelter belts of trees, methods to retain what moisture fell. But these were band-aids on a hemorrhage. The real solution, letting the grasslands return to their natural state, was economically impossible for families who needed to eat today. So the fight continued, against dust, against wind, against a landscape that seemed determined to drive humans away. And here's the cruelest irony of all. In 1941, the rain finally returned. The drought ended. Not because of anything humans did, but because weather patterns shifted, just as arbitrarily as they had shifted before. Some who had held on long enough saw their fields green again. Those who had left would never know if they could have made it just one more season, one more year. But the land wasn't the same. It was depleted, wounded, and the people who worked it were changed too, warier, less trusting of both nature and government promises. Because they had learned the hard truth of the Great Plains. The land gives, but it also takes away. And it doesn't care about your mortgage, your hungry children, or how hard you work. In Dust Bowl America, the land doesn't forgive. It just waits for the next opportunity to remind you who's really in charge. Not all wounds leave visible marks. Some cut deeper. In Dust Bowl America, trauma doesn't announce itself with bandages or casts. It lives in the 1,000-yard stare of farmers who've watched their life work blow away on the wind. It lives in children who flinch at sudden movements, who hoard food scraps, who wake screaming from nightmares filled with suffocating darkness. A generation grew up believing the end of the world looks like a wall of black dust on the horizon. The psychological toll is immeasurable because no one's measuring it. There are no trauma counselors in 1930s rural America, no support groups, no understanding of how sustained stress and loss reshape the mind. There's just the expectation to carry on, to endure, to somehow not break under pressures that would crush steel. Men who once stood tall begin to stoop, not just from physical labor, but from the weight of failure they were never meant to bear. They were taught that hard work guarantees success, that a man provides, that the land responds to dedication. When these fundamental beliefs crumble, something in them crumbles too. Some turn to violence, against livestock, property, themselves, their families. Police reports from the era show spikes in domestic incidents that coincide with dust storms, as if the external chaos gives permission for internal darkness to emerge. Others simply walk away. They leave notes or sometimes nothing at all. They join the ranks of the disappeared, men spotted jumping freight trains or trudging along highways, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. Their families rarely search. There are no resources for such luxuries, and besides, everyone understands the impulse to flee. Women suffer differently, but no less severely. They're expected to hold families together with resources that don't exist, to feed children from empty pantries, to provide comfort when they themselves receive none. Their hands crack from constant cleaning of dust that always returns. Their bodies fail from pregnancies in conditions of severe malnutrition. They age decades in years, and the children, they develop adaptations that will haunt them for life. They become hypervigilant, always watching the sky for dust clouds. They learn to eat everything on their plates fast, in case it's suddenly taken away. They discover how to become invisible when adult anger flares. They forget how to play. Suicide rates spike, though many go unreported. Accidental deaths increase, some suspiciously convenient. Alcoholism flourishes despite prohibition's recent end and general poverty, anything to numb the constant awareness of helplessness. Churches fill on Sundays, not just for spiritual comfort, but for the rare opportunity to be clean, to sit in a building that's been swept and dusted for the occasion, to pretend for an hour that order still exists in the world. The sermons focus increasingly on Job, on suffering, on endurance. The hymns sound like dirges even when the lyrics speak of joy. What makes it worse is the isolation. Each family suffers privately, convinced their struggles, failures, and desperate measures are unique. Shame prevents the sharing that might bring relief. Pride stops people from admitting how close to the edge they really are. Many who eventually leave the Dust Bowl carry these invisible wounds with them. They become the parents who insist their children clean their plates, who save string and paper bags, who react with disproportionate fear to economic downturns. They become the grandparents who can't explain to later generations why they keep cupboards full of canned goods they'll never eat. Because trauma doesn't just visit, it moves in, it becomes part of the family. And in Dust Bowl America, it's the inheritance that outlasts the dust. Not every story ends with an abandoned farm and a family heading west. Some communities endure, changed, wounded, but still standing. These aren't tales of triumph exactly. There are no parades, no monuments to survival. Just people who, through some combination of luck, stubbornness, and community bonds, managed to stay rooted while the world around them blew away. Take Garden City, Kansas, or Dalhart, Texas, towns that should have died, but didn't. They shrank, certainly. Buildings stood empty. Businesses closed. But a core remained, usually centered around a grain elevator, a church, a school, and whatever passed for industry in those parts. What made these survivors different? Often, it was diversification. Towns that relied solely on wheat were decimated. Those with multiple economic lifelines, a small factory, a railroad stop, a county seat government, had something to cling to when crops failed. Water played a crucial role. Communities lucky enough to sit near rivers or above reliable aquifers could irrigate at least some land. They became oases in the dust-blown landscape, drawing in desperate farmers from farther out on the plains. Leadership mattered too. Towns with forward-thinking mayors or council members implemented soil conservation measures earlier, applied for federal projects more successfully, and organized community responses to crises more effectively. They built windbreaks, dug community wells, and established food distribution systems that, while never adequate, at least kept people alive. Churches became more than spiritual centers. They were command posts for survival. Ministers coordinated relief efforts, turned sanctuaries into temporary housing during dust storms, and provided the moral authority necessary to convince proud farmers to accept help. Schools stayed open through impossible conditions. Teachers were paid in produce or promises. They taught in rooms where dust sifted constantly from the ceiling. They understood that education might be the only way out for the next generation. and they were determined to provide it, even as their own health suffered. The fabric of these communities changed. Social hierarchies shifted based on who could weather the crisis. Old rivalries were set aside in favor of collective action. Newcomers, government men, agricultural experts, even photographers documenting the disaster, were first viewed with suspicion, then gradually integrated into local life. Ethnic enclaves often showed particular resilience. German-Russian Mennonites in Kansas, Hispanic communities in Texas and New Mexico, Jewish agricultural colonies in the plains, groups who already lived somewhat apart from mainstream society, had developed self-sufficiency practices that served them well when external systems failed. These communities weren't immune to the dust or the economic devastation. They suffered too. But they suffered together, and that made a difference. They held dances in emptying towns. They organized baseball games on dust-covered fields. They continued county fairs with fewer exhibits and smaller prizes. They maintained the rituals of communal life, even as the material conditions for that life eroded around them. When the rains finally returned and World War II created new economic opportunities, these enduring communities became the foundation for the region's slow recovery. They didn't just survive, they preserved something of the culture, the knowledge and the human connections that would allow the plains to be re-inhabited. Their victory, if you can call it that, wasn't over nature. It was against dissolution, against the centrifugal forces of disaster that tear communities apart. They held onto each other while the wind tried to scatter them, and in Dust Bowl America, that might be the most impressive feat of all. In the isolation of Dust Bowl America, one technology provides a window to an outside world that seems impossibly distant: the radio. It sits in the corner of shacks and farmhouses, often the last luxury families refuse to sell. Even when electricity is a memory, they power it with car batteries carried home and carefully conserved. Because the radio isn't just entertainment, it's connection. It's proof that somewhere beyond the dust, America continues. When President Roosevelt's voice crackles through the static, delivering his fireside chats, people gather around receivers like they're campfires in the wilderness. His confident tone, his promises of action, his acknowledgement of their suffering, it's water to parched souls. "My friends," he begins, and for a moment, they believe someone powerful actually sees them. Weather reports become matters of life and death. Families plan their entire days around the forecast. Is a dust storm coming? Is there a chance of rain? The radio becomes the oracle, the prophet, the bearer of news that could mean survival or disaster. Music flows into homes where live instruments have long been sold or fallen silent. Big band sounds, emerging swing, Western tunes that speak of the same landscapes that are currently trying to kill them. For brief intervals, the tinny sounds transport listeners to dance halls they've never seen, to cities where dust doesn't coat every surface, to lives where joy might still be possible. Children huddle close to hear adventure serials like Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, or Little Orphan Annie. For 30 minutes, they live in narratives where problems resolve by the final commercial, where good triumphs reliably over evil, where no one goes hungry. News reports bring a complicated mix of comfort and unease. Dust storms in the plains rarely make national headlines, until the dust reaches Chicago or New York. Only then does the country seem to notice what's happening in its heartland. Listeners absorb world news about Hitler's rise or Japan's aggression with a strange detachment. Those problems belong to another world. Their apocalypse is already here. The commercials are almost cruel in their disconnect from plains reality. They advertise cleaning products to housewives who can't keep dust off surfaces for more than minutes. They promote foods that haven't been seen in local stores for years. They sell dreams of modern kitchens to women cooking over smoky wood stoves. And yet, people listen. They absorb. They allow themselves to imagine. Radio preachers find especially receptive audiences. When your world is collapsing around you, messages of redemption through suffering resonate. Men and women who've lost faith in government, in markets, in the land itself, still find room to believe in divine purpose. The radio evangelists understand this and craft their messages accordingly. For those considering the westward migration, the radio provides essential intelligence. California stations reach the plains at night, bringing reports of conditions, job availability, and treatment of Okies. These broadcasts are analyzed and debated like military dispatches from a front line. Local stations, where they exist, become community bulletin boards. Lost livestock, community meetings, deaths and births, items for barter, all find their way onto the airwaves. In areas where telephones are rare, the radio becomes the party line, the gossip fence, the town crier. As night falls and the static grows with atmospheric changes, families linger by their receivers, reluctant to break the tenuous connection to a world where dust doesn't rule, where rain falls regularly, where life proceeds with something resembling normalcy. Because in Dust Bowl America, the radio isn't just a box of wires and tubes. It's proof that somewhere, somehow, there might be something worth enduring for. After nearly a decade of drought, after the exodus of thousands, after countless funerals and foreclosures, after America had almost forgotten its dust-covered heart, the rain returns. Not dramatically, not in biblical torrents that wash away the pain. It comes in scattered showers at first, in spring storms that farmers eye suspiciously, in winter snow that actually accumulates instead of blowing away. By 1941, weather patterns have shifted. The drought officially ends. Gauge measurements return to normal, whatever that means in a place where normal has been forgotten. For those who stayed, who somehow held on through the worst environmental disaster in American history, the return of moisture feels less like triumph and more like a cruel joke. Now, after everything, after so many gave up and left, the rain falls on abandoned farms. It darkens the dust covering empty schoolhouses. It creates mud in main streets with more boarded businesses than open ones. It's the right solution years too late. Those who remained approach recovery cautiously, like abuse victims flinching at a raised hand. They plant, but not too much. They invest, but not too deeply. They hope, but not too openly. Because the plains have taught them the cost of optimism, new farming methods emerge from the disaster. Contour ploughing follows the land's natural curves, reducing erosion. Shelter belts of trees create windbreaks. Irrigation systems tap deeper aquifers. Cover crops protect exposed soil. The government, having finally recognized the scope of the catastrophe, offers guidance through the Soil Conservation Service. Extension agents teach techniques that might have prevented the disaster if implemented earlier. Farmers listen now, pride softened by a decade of failure. World War II arrives almost simultaneously with the rain, creating demand for wheat and jobs in factories for those who've given up on agriculture. Young men who grew up watching their families' farms blow away now find themselves in uniform, fighting in foreign lands that somehow seem less hostile than the ones they left. Towns that survived begin slow recoveries. New businesses open in buildings where dust once piled in corners. Churches fill again, with fewer people but more genuine gratitude. Schools expand their curriculum beyond basic survival skills. But it's not a return to pre-drought conditions. It can't be. Too much has changed. The land has changed. Tons of topsoil lost to the wind, nutrients depleted, contours altered by erosion. It will grow again, but differently, more fragilely. The demographics have changed. The population is older, fewer in number, more cautious in temperament. Many communities have lost their young people permanently, either to the war or to opportunities discovered during forced migration. The culture has changed. The unbridled optimism of earlier plains settlement has been replaced by a guarded pragmatism. Conspicuous consumption becomes socially unacceptable. Saving of money, food, materials becomes almost religious in its observance. Most significantly, the relationship with the land has changed. The belief that man could fully control nature through technology and determination lies buried under years of dust. A new respect emerges, sometimes verging on fear, for the power of natural forces. For those who held on, there's no celebration when the rains return. There's relief, certainly, cautious planning, tentative planting, but also a constant glance at the sky, a regular check of soil moisture, a persistent worry that what happened once could happen again. Because in Dust Bowl America, Even recovery comes with the taste of dust, and the rain, when it finally returns, can never wash away the memories of what was lost. 80 years after the last great dust storm, the legacy of the Dust Bowl lives on, in the land, in families, in national policies, and in the American consciousness. It wasn't just a disaster, it was a transformation. The most obvious physical reminders dot the landscape of the Great Plains. Abandoned homesteads slowly returning to prairie, small towns that never regained their pre-drought populations, shelter belts of trees planted in desperate attempts to break the wind. The land itself bears hidden scars, altered soil compositions, changed watershed patterns, and fields still recovering nutrients lost to the great black blizzards. But the deeper legacies are human ones. In agriculture, the Dust Bowl revolutionized farming practices. No-till methods, crop rotation, contour plowing, and soil conservation became standard rather than experimental. Farmers who once measured success purely by yield now factor in sustainability. Government agricultural programs born in crisis became permanent features of rural policy. Economically, the disaster accelerated the industrialization of American farming. Small family operations, already challenged by mechanization, couldn't survive the combined assault of drought and depression. Land consolidated into larger holdings. Corporate agriculture gained ground. The romantic era of the independent yeoman farmer ended not with a bang, but with a choking cloud of dust. Demographically, the Dust Bowl reshaped the nation. The westward migration it triggered, particularly to California, altered that state's culture, politics, and labor landscape permanently. Cities grew as rural areas emptied. The urbanization of America, already underway, accelerated as people fled land that could no longer support them. Politically, the crisis cemented the federal government's role in addressing environmental disasters. Programs created as emergency responses became institutions. The Soil Conservation Service, the Farm Security Administration, expanded agricultural extension services. The notion that Washington had responsibility for environmental management took root. Culturally, the Dust Bowl seared itself into American arts and literature. John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, Dorothea Lange's photographs, Woody Guthrie's ballads, these didn't just document the disaster, they shaped how Americans understood it and themselves. The image of the stoic plains farmer facing unimaginable adversity became part of national mythology. Psychologically, the Dust Bowl created patterns of behavior that would be passed down through generations. Children who lived through it became adults with distinctive traits: fierce frugality, distrust of debt, obsessive attention to weather patterns, inability to waste food. They raised their own children with these values, creating ripples of influence that continue today. Environmentally, the disaster forced a national reckoning with the consequences of exploitative land use. It demonstrated that human actions could create climate effects, an early warning about environmental feedback loops. Modern climate science owes some of its public acceptance to memories of human-caused ecological devastation in America's heartland. Perhaps most profoundly, the Dust Bowl challenged American exceptionalism, the belief that determination and hard work could overcome any obstacle. The Plains farmers didn't fail because they were lazy or unmotivated. They worked themselves to exhaustion, and the dust came anyway. This complicated the national narrative about success and failure in ways that still resonate. For the dwindling number of survivors, now in their 90s or older, the legacy is deeply personal. They carry the Dust Bowl in their bodies, in lungs scarred by dust pneumonia, in hands gnarled from too early labor, in memories sharper than their aging minds should allow. When they speak of it, which many won't, the years fall away and the dust returns. Because in Dust Bowl America, the past never fully settles. It just waits for the wind to rise again. The Dust Bowl, lessons written in dust. Vernon Phillips never finished his story. Like so many Dust Bowl survivors, his testimony remains incomplete, fragmentary, much like the history of this American apocalypse itself. The tales of those who lived through it are fading as the last witnesses disappear one by one. But their legacy remains, etched into the land and the national consciousness. The Dust Bowl was more than an environmental disaster. It was a complex convergence of ecological mismanagement, economic catastrophe, and human suffering that transformed a nation. It tested American resilience in ways that no foreign war or economic downturn could match, because it struck at the most fundamental relationship of all, that between humans and the land beneath their feet. What emerges from these collected stories is not a simple narrative of victory over adversity or a morality tale about human hubris. It's a more nuanced testament to both human frailty and strength. The plains dwellers didn't conquer the dust, the rain simply returned. They didn't triumph over nature. They learned, painfully, to work within its boundaries. Their achievement wasn't mastery, but endurance. The quieter themes resonate most powerfully across the decades. The small kindnesses that sustained communities when larger systems failed. The invisible psychological scars that shaped generations. The resilience that manifested not in heroic acts, but in the simple, stubborn determination to plant again after watching crops fail year after year. For modern America, the Dust Bowl offers uncomfortable parallels to contemporary challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, economic inequality, mass migration. These aren't just policy issues, but existential questions about our relationship with the natural world and with each other. The dust storms of the 1930s demonstrated how quickly seemingly stable systems can collapse when ecological tipping points are crossed. Perhaps the most important legacy is the reminder that environmental disasters aren't equal opportunity afflictions. Then, as now, those with fewer resources suffered most deeply and recovered most slowly. The bankers in their brick buildings weathered the storms differently than the tenant farmers watching topsoil blow away. The well-connected secured government assistance that others never saw, and always systemic inequalities determined who had options and who had none. As the last witnesses pass from the scene, their final gift is perspective. They lived through what felt like the end of the world, and discovered it wasn't. The land recovered, though changed. Communities rebuilt, though smaller. Life continued, though carrying the memory of dust in its lungs. Their testimony reminds us that apocalypses aren't always sudden. Sometimes they build slowly, storm by storm, season by season, decision by decision, and they are rarely total. Even in the darkest periods, kindness persists. Hope endures. Humanity finds ways to continue. The Dust Bowl was America's forgotten apocalypse, a disaster that didn't fit neatly into narratives of progress or triumph. It revealed both the remarkable resilience and the profound vulnerability of a nation. It demonstrated how deeply our fate is tied to the land, regardless of technological advancement. And it showed how human communities can either fracture or cohere when tested by forces beyond their control. As climate change brings new challenges to our relationship with the natural world, these lessons written in dust deserve remembering, not just as history, but as prophecy, because the wind still blows across the plains, and the earth remembers what we have forgotten.